How you doing, Raven fans, Oriole fans? Thank you very much for joining us this on Sunday as we're airing this, we're recording this. Thank you for joining the Ravori Sports Podcast for fans like me. Like and subscribe all of our social media content. So definitely, if you're checking this out, you're checking us out on our YouTube page, our Twitter page, our Twitch page, Rumble. I know some of you, Spotify now is a format we're using. So thank you. All of our platforms, check it out. Definitely too, especially if you're watching this on the Twitter page. We appreciate you. A lot of views there. Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube right there. Ravori Sports Podcast. Put it in on YouTube or Ravori Sports. It should just pop up. Maryland football preview is coming up here August 24th. And also we're going to review the entire NFL on the 31st. Data Feed Genesis Notary Services. Winchester, Virginia. If you know, you know. All of you in Winchester, check it out here. And we have a guy I have known for a long while. We haven't spoken in a while, but when I met him, it was something that had nothing to do with sports. And every Saturday when we talk, man, he just would just you should have seen it pre-show. We could have just recorded. And that's exactly what I remember. Nino just loves to communicate with people, loves to actually be out there and talk. What we're going to talk about tonight, the sweet science, especially. Nino, formerly with the Maryland State Athletic Commission, but I used to just think of him as a fight ref. How you doing, Nino? How's it going, man?
I'm doing great, Charles. Greetings from Fairbanks, Alaska, where I am now. I've been up here since February, and definitely good to hear somebody from back home down in the lower 48.
Yeah, man. I'm glad that I guess we kind of wondered how it worked out for you. Definitely, you got a job there, government job, which we cry. Yeah, so that's just fantastic. You didn't get doged, you were telling me, so that's that's a whole nother thing we won't get into on camera. We'll have time. But I'm glad to see.
I feel like I won that round.
A lot of people didn't, obviously, as well. Real quick, and I know we had a whole thing planned. I talked about it. Obviously, the news came out this week. The immortal one is no longer with us. Hulk Hogan passed away. This is my first chance to really talk about it on camera here as well. Hulk was 71 years old. Did you ever meet Hulk by any chance working with them? Or I'm certainly WWE guys. I'm sure you know a bunch of those guys or met some were working with those.
Yeah,
at that time, back in the day.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, I never had the chance to meet as they call him, the immortal one, Hulk Hogan himself. But, I've met a lot of WWE personnel, wrestlers, obviously. I met actually when I was in the Army in Iraq, Vince McMahon, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Rey Mysterio, and a couple others. They came over on a USO tour. So I met him in that capacity. And then I also met him, working with the Maryland State Athletic Commission. But definitely Hulk Hogan. Man, he was definitely one of the ones I wanted to be like growing up, as a wrestling fan. And the bout between him and Andre in WrestleMania 3 when, Hulk slammed him. And, a lot of people don't know, if you listen to Hulk tell the story, he tore about 3 or 4 bicep muscles.
I believe it.
Whenever he slammed Andre, because
I believe
it wasn't 500 pounds of barbell weight. That was 500 pounds of human flesh and muscle that he was slammed.
I can't think of a bigger human being I ever saw than Andre in anything. Even in, I'm talking about just height. Obviously, that was something. He was just well over 7 feet tall. He was like 7'5", but just the size, how wide. And Andre wasn't a fat guy, but also he wasn't this like muscular guy. either. He, you know, it was really just he really was the eighth wonder of the world. So I absolutely believe it, that Andre. So rest in peace to Hulk, man. As far as that goes,
Yeah.
a lot of people mixed opinions about, but I'm not going to focus on that. What he actually did, you know, like me and you were kids. Like every kid in school watched wrestling when we were there. So
yeah. I remember the first WrestleMania when you know, he was partners with Mr. T. You had, you know, Muhammad Ali as referee. You had Liberace as the timekeeper, and you know, when he fought Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. And you know, it's sad that none of those guys are with us right now. I think Mr. T might still be.
Mr. T is, and some of those guys
all
are.
those participants, yeah, they've gone on, and you know, through YouTube and you know all these other you know, media platforms. I mean, their legacies definitely live on, and that's, as they say, you know, with the way sports is today, you know, boxing, wrestling, football, it's never going to be as good as it was back then, but it's as good as it's going to get right now.
Yeah, I hear you. I saw a podcast like a couple of weeks ago. I didn't watch it, but I love the name. That guys our age, we're the new old guys. We're the guys of the age that are telling these stories now because we're losing Hulk. We've lost Andre. We've lost all these guys. What you're saying. So let's talk about the sweet science here.
Absolutely, let's do it.
We're getting the fight of the century here coming up soon. We've waited so long now for Canelo and Crawford to get in the ring. Crawford, I think, enormously underrated. I think he's not that far from a Floyd Mayweather in terms of talent. Canelo, I think, is about not quite as good, but he's about as good as you've been for a whole career. Who do you think wins this fight? Not a lot of Canelo, right? People think that Canelo is going to win this fight, from what I can see here.
Well, you know, it's really hard to say. You know, like you mentioned, I mean, they're both two of the top fighters in the world. You know, Terrence Crawford, I mean, he's been at the top of his game now for, you know, 7, 8, 9 years. And obviously Canelo, you know, he's been at the top of his game, you know, for a little bit longer than Terrence, because Canelo turned pro when he was 16. And yeah, you're right. It's definitely going to be the new fight of the century or the fight of the millennium. You know, and it's really hard to pick a winner. I mean, because they're both great fighters, and, you know, it's going to be a great fight, and it's definitely one that I really wouldn't want to miss, and I'm not going to miss.
As expensive as the fights are, you definitely watch the fight. Why isn't Crawford as big a star as Mayweather in a lot of these fighters, despite his skill level? I think he's been number one pound for pound for at least 7, 8 years now. I mean, I don't know what he has.
Well,
it seems like he hasn't. It seems like he doesn't take the fights like this one enough of the time.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with the way they're promoted. You know, Floyd, you know, he promoted himself. You know, he didn't let, you know, he made some noise when he was doing it, obviously, you know, but that's the stuff that sells. You know, you can go back to Muhammad Ali, the way he self-promoted his fights, you know, and the way he promoted himself. You know, I am the greatest, you know, come up with the rhymes and everything, you know, in 4, you're going to hit the floor and all, you know, all that type of stuff. You know, Floyd did the same thing. You know, he self-promoted. You know, you would see him throwing the money out at the cameras and everything. And, you know, Terrence, you know, he's taken, you know, the more traditional approach to it. So I think the more, you know, I think the more, in the traditional aspect, you know, Terrence is doing it the right way. You know, not to knock Floyd, because he didn't let anybody get his hands on his money, you know, with promoters and managers and everything, where I think that might be what the, you know, why, you know, Floyd is obviously higher as a self-promoter than Terrence is, in a sense, because Terrence, you know, I've never met him, but from what I've heard, he's a real mellow guy. You know, he's very under the radar type deal. So, you know, of course, those guys aren't going to get the notoriety as, you know, the more flamboyant ones are, like Floyd and Ali and, you know, some of these other guys that we've had.
Here's the thing that has to happen a lot of times for guys to get fighter. You can be like, my favorite fighter of all time was Arturo Gatti. nowhere near
Yep.
the class fighter of like a Mayweather or Bernard or De La Hoya, not even close.
No.
But what did he do in the ring? He just would just get the crap beat out of him every time. It was fantastic. You could be the Rocky Balboa, that's how you get popular. Or you can be the Floyd Mayweather, the promoter, self-promote. Everybody hated him. Everybody hated Floyd to see him. Everybody couldn't wait to see him lose his undefeated streak. He spent the whole time talking about how great he was in between fights. So yeah, Canelo's really not either one of those guys. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And Floyd, Floyd was, I get the question a lot, who's the greatest fighter? Is it Floyd? Floyd was the best of this generation, from the, mid 90s until he retired, so he was the best for a 20-year span, but when you go back to the 70s, the 60s, when you had 8 weight classes, those guys would fluctuate weights like, good example, Rocky Marciano. He was heavyweight champion at 180 pounds. Well, today at 180 pounds, you're a light heavyweight,
Yeah.
So when you look at it generationally and in the era that you're fighting, yes, you had all the great middleweights, Sugar Ray Robinson, who personally I think is the greatest fighter ever. You had Carmen Basilio, you had Marcel Cerdan, you had, Gene Fulmer, you had all these guys. And back then, Charles, those guys, they fought 4 or 5 times a month. And what was the saying? To keep bread and butter on the table. Now if a guy fights 3 times a year, he's so active. You look at Sugar Ray Robinson, he'd fight one night, he'd fight on a Saturday night in Providence and then fight on a Tuesday night in Boston. So again, it's just
that's the fights we know about in the ring, not anything they did on the street or on the side or wherever else.
That's right. They're underground. And then plus we got to take into account all the sparring that they do. So, these guys, they take a beating what they put their bodies through. And, I've seen some of it firsthand being an inspector in the corners.
What's happening with the heavyweight division right now, man? I mean, you got one guy that's on the top, and as fantastic as Usyk is, like, I don't think 10 people would know him if he was to walk down the street. I think, like, in this country, when it was actually making traction when we had Fury and Deontay Wilder at the top of the chart. Deontay obviously being an American. Again, the showmanship that both of them have as well. Fury not an American, but the showmanship and all that, dating the models and all that other stuff. Like he was really a guy that, and now like we got a guy I think a super dominant guy, but nobody knows who he is. What is boxing I think doing about that?
I think the problem with that is you have too many sanctioning bodies. And in boxing terms, we call them the alphabet soup organization. You got the WBC, the WBA, the IBF, the WBO, the IBC, and all these other organizations. And not only do they have one title, one belt, you have the interim champion, you have the platinum champion, you have the golden champion, you have the undisputed champion. So a lot of it, it's because
those are made up, by the way. Those of you watching, some of those,
like some of them are real though.
Yeah.
But you look at it. I mean, and that's why, because there's too many titles. And you're right. Back in the history of boxing, the heavyweight champion of the world was the most powerful man on the planet. Because back in the day, you had boxing, horse racing, and baseball. You could know who the heavyweight champion of the world was. Now, if you ask the average person who's the heavyweight champion of the world, you're right, Charles, 100%. They're not going to be able to tell you unless you follow the sport religiously, like we do. And a lot of it's because the networks want to promote a title fight. So if I'm a promoter, or if you're a promoter and you're trying to get a contract Friday night or whatever night of the week, hey, I want to put on a boxing card with your network. What's the fees? Well, what's the title going to be? They say, well, there's not going to be a title. Well,
Right.
okay, then we're not going to air the show. So they'll say, okay, it's going to be for the WBC Continental America's Junior Featherweight Championship. Not to disrespect the title like that, but what the hell is that? You
Right.
know,
Right. Right.
but again, it's the attraction. It's the attraction. Oh, we're gonna promote a title fight, and then people are gonna tune in as opposed to say we're gonna have a title elimination bout between the number 1 and number 2 contenders, and the winner in 6 months from now is going to get a title shot. So that's how it all works, and that's why there's so many titles and so many organizations involved. It's because of the networks, drawing the money, trying to get the ratings.
One guy that never needed a title, like just use that for like goes to what your point was like a Mike Tyson or like Oscar De La Hoya or
Oh yeah,
like in those cases, it didn't matter. They were such big stars; they wouldn't need a title to promote it.
no.
So, speaking of Mike, where were you? Where are you with Paul in that? A lot of people saying that's Jake Paul is ruining boxing. I kind of don't see it that way, personally. I don't think that at all. That he's ruining. I mean, he's not a real fighter, but I think it's boxing has kind of created their own mess with the fact that they've allowed this to happen, allowed him to have is kind of on them. Where do you sit with Paul?
Yeah. I agree with it. I mean, he is who he is. He's he was a YouTube sensation. Him and his brother Logan Paul, and yeah, you're right. Boxing, let it happen. You look at his fights with Mayweather, with Tyson, of course. To look at it in a grand scheme of things, people ask me all the time what I thought about the Paul and Tyson fight. Oh, look, Mike Tyson is a 58-year-old man.
He made a lot of money.
Somehow he got somehow he got medically cleared. But the state of Texas, Charles, with all that, they got about $19-20 million in tax revenue. The administrators in the state, they had to approve that fight. Because you look at the economy that we're living in right now. The price of gas and the price of meat isn't going down. So yeah, for that amount of money, they had to approve it. Now the fight itself was, it wasn't what we expected, and people
what I expected.
Yeah, well,
I mean, Mike said. I mean, like you said it.
Yeah.
He's 60 years old. As great as Mike, what?
Yeah.
Mike hasn't been a good fighter for over 30 years. In about 30 years, like you could argue, like he's past his prime, like in the 90s, like 90. What? Since his fight
back when
since his fight with Lennox,
he started.
Has it been? Like, go ahead.
Yeah. That was when Lennox beat him, and then he fought a couple times afterward. He lost to some lesser known opponents, and but then again, if someone's saying, hey Mike, or hey Charles, or hey Mike, or hey Nino, if we're our age, hey, we got a $19 million contract here, who in their right mind is going to turn down that amount of money?
So he shouldn't have turned it. He shouldn't have turned it down. He should have taken it, like he did take it. But my point is, why is that the best fight, the most watched fight? That's the point.
Because Mike draws. Mike will draw when he's 70 years old, because he, like you said earlier, he doesn't need a title. He already has his title. To preface it with Hulk Hogan, the immortal Hulk Hogan, he's Iron Mike Tyson. You don't need a title to promote him. He's going to sell just because of his name. And, like Oscar De La Hoya did, when he didn't have titles, he sold because of his name. He had the looks, he had the big Spanish following and everything, and people went. He drew people, and it's all about who's going to get butts in seats, who's going to make the most money for the promoters, the state, and the fighters. And as Wade could say, then everyone makes their money, and we can all live happily ever after, in theory.
You're right about that. Let's talk about your work there, what you used to do. You used to be a fight referee. You used to but MMA too. Did I hear you say that, or was that just boxing? Was that mostly boxing?
No, boxing and MMA. I was I actually, I refereed in the amateurs, but in the pro ranks, I actually got licensed as a judge in Pennsylvania right before this opportunity came in Alaska. So But I was an inspector with the Maryland State Athletic Commission. And, for those of you that are unfamiliar, all the viewers out there listening in, if you've ever seen women and men in suits going in between rounds, those are commission employees, state employees, and they are in the ring. They are basically an extension of the eyes and ears of the referee and the doctor. They're making sure that the fighters are in, decent condition, good condition. They're making sure trainers aren't doing anything they're not supposed to, because if you look at the history of boxing, there's some strange stuff that can happen in that 1 minute break in between rounds. One of the biggest things in history was when Muhammad, then Cassius Clay, fought Sonny Liston for the first time in Miami in '63. Clay wasn't faring very well. Liston was being the dominant fighter that he was. Well, his trainer, Angelo Dundee, had a razor blade and he cut Clay's glove. So they had to replace the entire glove. It took about 20 minutes. Again, good strategy on his part, but the roles of the inspectors is to make sure that none of that stuff happens, making sure that
iodine use,
cheating,
cheating, that stuff that you're watching for that stuff too, right?
Oh, yep, only sealed water, no Gatorade, no Powerade, because you don't know what's in that stuff. Especially if a fighter's saying he's hurt, his ribs broken, or he can't see, he has a headache. And then the trainers are going to do what the trainers do. Come on, champ, 2 more rounds. You got this. They're going to try to push their fighter, but it's up to the inspectors to tell the referee, hey, ref, he said he has a headache and he can't see. You might want to call the doctor. Let the doctor come in and do what he or she has to do to make a determination as to whether or not that fight can continue. And a little side note: the doctors cannot stop the fight. They can advise, because the referee is the sole arbiter. What the referee says goes. So the doctor can say, hey, I don't think, stop it. The doctor can't. Then 100 out of 100 referees, if they're in their right mind, they're going to stop the fight and take the advice of the doctor, because
doctor has no dog in it. They have no dog in the fight. Nope. They don't really.
Nope. They'll come in, shine a light in their eyes. Good example. I worked a lot of shows at Maryland Live in Hanover. If a doctor says, hey, do you know where you're at? And they say Baltimore. Okay, that's close enough. But if you're at Maryland Live, hey, where are you? And you say in Boise, Idaho, then you're definitely you got some stuff going on, and the fight's going to be stopped. So
what's the weirdest thing you've seen?
Look at your overall condition. The worst that I've seen.
Weirdest or whatever.
I remember the hardest. We'll go. There's a lot of injuries that I saw with MMA and in boxing. I saw a guy's leg was at a 90-degree angle. Because he got some move put on him, and his leg snapped. But I remember I was working a fight with Devin Haney at the MGM Grand down in Oxon Hill, and I forget who he was fighting. But, I was sitting on the outside of the ring, as an inspector, and Haney had this guy along the ropes, and he just wham. Charles, if you've ever been to a parade and you feel the bass of the drums, like you could feel it, you could feel the vibration. Yeah. You can feel it in your soul. That is what I felt when Devin Haney hit this guy, and this guy just stood there. And I'm thinking to myself, holy cripe, this guy is, I felt that punch, and the guy just stood there. And then, I went in between rounds. He had a broken nose. It wasn't bleeding, but it was all swollen and everything. The fight, the doctor came in, checked him out, said he was good to go. It went a couple more rounds, and then Haney, he finished the job. He knocked him out. But man, just the punishment that these guys take, that these men and women take, and have the ability to stand there and come back and withstand it. It's some of it's just amazing. Of course, there's some fights I've seen. A guy gets hit with a jab, he goes down, takes the 10 count, gets his payday, and goes on to the next one. So, so it's both ends of the spectrum.
You said you were in a fight with Tank Davis. I think Tank Davis
Yes.
hits like a cement truck, brother. I mean, he
Oh
reminds
yeah.
me. We talked a little bit about Pacquiao, I appreciate, and like kind of the same. I think like it just it hits when they hit.
Yeah.
It just bad tensions. They're stronger than they
Yeah.
realize.
Oh yeah. And I was against Spectre for Tank Davis's fight at Royal Farms Arena in 2019 when he fought Ricardo Nunez. And I was in Tank's corner as the official, the inspector, and it was I think Tank hurt him at the end of the first round, and then second round I think Nunez, he went down once or twice. I don't remember off the top of my head, but he was on the ropes, and it just a week before that there was an Argentinian fighter that ended up getting killed because he took a lot of punishment, and Tank, he hit Nunez, his head snapped back over the ropes, and then took one or two more punches, and the referee Harvey Dock jumped in, and the crowd, the crowd was cheering, but there was some boos, but I mean, Harvey saved a life that night, because you get hit like that, you have the initial blow. And then, God forbid, when a guy goes down, when they lose consciousness, they're hitting their head off of the mat, which is all canvas and wood. Now you have a secondary concussion blow.
You are not that far away in a fight from a death. I don't think it. You are much closer. If somebody's beat up or whatever in a fight, they get hit 10 more times, and it's life and death. I mean, if they're really out of it.
And and it safety, you hear it all the time. Safety of the fighter. The crowd, of course, they're paying to see the knockout. I liken it to baseball because I'm a baseball fan too. Back in the 90s, everybody wanted to see Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds hit their 600-foot home runs. Nobody wanted to pay to see Pedro Martinez and Greg Maddux in a pitcher's duel. Besides me. But it's the same thing. Nobody wants to see masterful boxing, a 10-round or 12-round clinic like Pernell Whitaker used to put on and just win every round. Or Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather in their days, just a 12-round virtuoso performance. It's a 120, 108 or 119, 109 decision. Everybody wants to see the knockout and people getting carried out. Well, I mean, you're right. You're one punch away. And you mentioned Arturo Gotti earlier. Look at the punishment that he took. His eyes would be swollen, his nose would be all over his face, but he would the referees would let the fight go, and sometimes it'd win, but sometimes it'd lose. But you got to look at the long-term effects.
Michael Buffer referred to him as the blood and guts champion. That's what he was. That's what. He was. He just.
Yep.
I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, in his case.
No, and that stuff, you don't just heal overnight. A baseball pitcher, they throw 100 pitches, in 6 or 7 innings. They're off for 5 days. They go get their arm stretched, put ice. But boxers, when they're taking that kind of punishment, most of the time it's an automatic 60-day suspension. If it's a knockout, if the referee hits the 10 count and they're taking punishment, it's a 60-day suspension. The minimum is 30 days if you're hurt. If the referee stops the fight, it's a 30-day suspension. Sometimes a guy doesn't get marked and he gets no days, but you get 60-day suspension automatically. Then you have to let your body heal. And during that suspension, you're not supposed to spar. You're not supposed to do anything. But do these guys? Yeah. They do. The only thing you're allowed to do is really road work and heavy bag and mitt work, hitting the hand pads and everything. But yeah, these guys spar. I mean, but again, it's their livelihoods. That's what they're paid to do. And a lot of times that's the only thing they know. So, it's definitely a risky sport and something that, all officials, safety of the fighter, you take that, you never put a price on safety or somebody's life, God forbid. And, at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it?
I agree. I think not that I'm a pro boxer or anything, but learning how to box kind of saved my life in a lot of ways. Because I was a little kid pushed around. I learned, man, I
Yeah,
had to learn how to do something. Even to
yeah,
this day, I'm shadow boxing. I mean, all the people make fun of me all the time for doing it and all that other stuff. And I think like there is a manhood thing to it that where young men, it is good for young men to have that
yes,
because you're going to have that in life as a man. You're going to have that in
yeah,
life to learn how to
and
fight in the box and protect yourself and do
and
something.
not even from the physical aspect, but the mental aspect too. Because a lot of times, the fight in the ring is much more easier than what these fighters have going on outside of the ring. So the ring is a safe haven. Um, unless you're Floyd Mayweather or Rocky Marciano, you're not going to win every fight. You know, and even in life, you have some adversity. Divorces, death of a parent, death of a child. Whatever the case may be. So in a way, boxing teaches you that discipline, that self-discipline as to how to get over it. What's the old saying? You get knocked down in a fight, you get back up. Same thing happens in life,
Get
outside of the
knocked down
ring.
7 times and get up 8.
Yeah, you get back up. You get
Yeah.
back up. And that's the only choice you have because, in today's day and age, Charles, nobody's going to feel sorry for you.
Okay.
And you look at it like this. You take 100% of the people that you know or you're acquainted with, 90% are happy you have your problems, and 10% don't give a damn about your problems because they have their own. So, you got to have the self motivation and the self desire to get back up and fight that extra round, not only in the ring, but in life. And, I've been through it. I'm sure you've been through it. So, it teaches you a lot of life lessons as well.
Yeah, in boxing and in life, like the Rocky movie said, nothing
Hmm.
hits as hard as life. You just keep
That's
going,
right.
one round at a time. My favorite from the Creed, one round at a time, one step at a time, one fight at a time, one moment at a time.
Yep.
Sometimes that's all you do.
Yep.
Sometimes you just go at it as well. Post boxing, I
Hmm.
think like my brother asked me one time, like about athletes. Why do so many of them become commentators and coaches and things like that? And it's like, well, what's left for them? Like, it's either that
Yeah.
or you get a regular job. And a lot of them don't
Yeah.
even get to do that. And they have I think fighting is even worse. I don't even think that's there
Yeah.
for a lot of them. What happens to fighters that you've seen in so many years after they're out of the ring?
Well, yeah, I'm happy you brought that up, because somebody asked me, a couple months ago, why are fighters broke? And, that's a good question. Not just fighters, but a lot of athletes in general. Well, you look at it from a boxing perspective. A manager, in some cases, off the top, gets 33 and a third percent. A promoter. So if you have if you're making $100,000 for a fight, you do the math here. 33 and a third percent, you're down to 67,000.
That's
Your
before the
promoter
tax
gets,
man.
yeah, your promoter
We're not
gets
even. We didn't go there.
25%. Your promoter gets 25%. Okay, so say now you're down to 55,000 or 53,000. Your trainers, usually, your primary, your two trainers and a cut man, 10% right there. You're right. Federal, state, and local taxes. Okay, so say now you're down to 20,000. Um, your sparring partners, you're not going to let you. They're not going to let you beat on them for nothing. So your sparring partners, 5 or 6% right there. Accommodations for your hotel, especially when you're staying in the suites and everything. Plus, oh yeah, you have car payments, you have kids, child support, electric bills. So if a fighter makes $100,000 and they come out with 5,000, 6,000, they're lucky. Because of all you're these a lot of these fighters are constantly in debt to their manager because their managers and promoters, they'll put up the money for their resorts where they train at. So if you're in an 8 or 9 week training camp in Palm Springs, California, in Big Bear or whatever, if that's $50,000, your man, oh yeah, here, here, I'm gonna give you, here, I'm gonna pay for everything. If I'm the manager, I'm gonna pay for everything. Just get me on the back end. Well, now you're in debt to your manager from the 100,000 you just made, or however much you just made, and that's by the way, no health insurance. These guys got to pay. They got to pay their own medical insurance.
Nobody will take them. Boxers
No,
and wrestlers,
they're
people
too
don't realize that they're not gonna.
Nope.
If they have it, it's again uber expensive because of what they do for a living.
Yeah, and just on a personal side, I have a daughter with Down syndrome. It took me fighting tooth and nail to try to get her on insurance. Just because of the risk, and nobody's punching her. She's not putting her body through all the all the risks and taking all the risks that these fighters do. So yeah, but no health insurance, no Medicare, no retirement accounts. There's no 401ks, unless and you see a lot of the guys, these fighters, they'll say, who's managing your money? Oh, my cousin or my uncle is. What happens? They end up broke because they're putting all that trust in that person instead of going through an investment firm, a legit firm to manage their money for them. So yeah, that's why a lot of these guys, they get into commentary, especially the one that have their faculties about them and their wits about them. Roy Jones, he does commentary. Antonio Tarver, he does. All these fighters that do it because that's their specialty. So yeah, I mean, it's a way for them to make some money. Public appearances, autograph signings, and things like that. But yeah, again, when you look at it, you could say, the fighter's making $1 million or $3 million a fight. If they come out of that with 50, 60,000, they're lucky because of everything I just mentioned.
How often is that story you told? Would you say it's 20%, 70%, 30%? What would you say? Is that usually?
Pardon me, I didn't catch all the questions.
So that story you just told, would you say that's 30% of the time, 40% of the time? How often you think that is?
I would probably
without
say
having any data,
probably.
What would you say?
Probably about 30-40% of the time, especially for your big championship fights. Like Crawford. Like Crawford and Canelo. Those fighters. They have all those expenses. But for some of the local guys, the local shows, they don't have those because those, they're just up and comers, and these promoters and trainers, they know who's going to be their cash cows, who they can make it from, who they can get money from, and but once you get your bigger fights, your pay-per-view fights, your title elimination ones, those are where you start seeing a lot of the expenses come in, and then fighters not having as much as they thought they had, because of reasons that I just mentioned, and it's sad because they get taken advantage of.
How does the Maryland State Athletic Commission profit from this? I always kind of wondered that too. Where they, how is it they had, because they sanction all the boxing, the wrestling, the mixed martial arts in the state. There's a cost for that. No, yes. I mean, there's something. Where does that money come from?
The actual monies as to what the state gets, it comes from the tax revenue. And the athletic commission itself doesn't get a dime from the taxes. It goes straight to the comptroller's office. The comptroller is the one. The promoters will write a check, for whatever the tax is. They'll give it to the executive director, and the executive director will take it, give it to the comptroller's office across the street. So the athletic commission, we don't see a penny from any of the fights that we have. In fact, we're paying because we got to pay inspectors, we pay referees, we pay judges. So the state's paying out money. Well, yes, the athletic commission itself is paying it out of our own budget. The state of Maryland is the one that's benefiting from it because it's going to the comptroller, and the comptroller allocates it to whatever county or whatever jurisdiction has the fight, and it all goes back to that county. So yeah, we don't see. Yeah, I mean, and one of the issues was, I mean, heck, even if we could see 5 or 10% of it, it would help out immensely. But unfortunately, the way the statutes are written, it's that's not the case.
And how much money would you say it would be for? And Maryland doesn't have a lot of big fights, even though they had, Tank Davis.
Yeah,
I've seen Rockmon some fight,
yeah.
but not really. But what would you say states pulling in for like Alvarez and Crawford? What would you say there? How
For
much money do you think the state of Texas is going to make that? I think
oh,
Texas.
that'll be getting millions. That'll be getting millions because again, Crawford's a draw. Canelo, he has the big following. He's going to have a lot of his supporters in the crowd. A lot of the Hispanics. A lot of the people from Mexico going to be coming up. A lot of Mexican Americans are going to be there. So yeah, it's going to be, it's going to be about probably then you look at entertainment, the hotels, the restaurants. Texas, they're going to be making bank. They're probably going to be getting about $25-30 million in tax revenue from it. Probably more than Tyson and Paul that they generated.
I believe that. I absolutely believe that. Well, one more thing here.
Sure.
What's next for you? All right. So I know where you are and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that this part of it, I don't want to, go into your civilian life there.
No.
But what's next for you as far as going into fighting and all that other stuff as well? What's next for you there? What haven't you done yet that you still want to do?
Oh yeah. Well, right now, I'm just, I just got up here with this civilian job, and I plan on holding it for, a couple years, and then coming back down to the East Coast, and then, getting myself reestablished in wherever I end up, whether it's Maryland, Virginia, or Pennsylvania, to get back into the sport of boxing in whatever capacity I'm wanted or needed, whether it's a timekeeper, a judge, an inspector, scorekeeper, whatever. I'm going to start looking at some conventions here, because every year, every major organization, they have their conventions where you get licensed as a referee and a judge. So, I'll look at where some of those are, start going to some conventions, just getting reestablished, getting myself ABC certified again, the Association of Boxing Commissions. They have seminars, 2-3 day seminars around the country for judges to get licensed, for referees to get licensed. And then, most states will accept that certification. So I'm definitely looking to get back into it. Every time I watch a fight on YouTube or on TV, I start getting the itch, I start twitching in my seat. So I'm definitely looking to get back into it in a couple years, and in whatever capacity I'm needed, and whoever would want me.
What made you start in the first place?
Well,
outside of just being a boxing fight or liking fights in general.
Well, I actually got started watching boxing in 1987, and I'll never forget it. It was when Mark Breland fought a Korean guy named Sung Hoon Lee. It was on the Mike Tyson and Terrell Biggs undercard. It was a Friday night outside my house in Pittsburgh, PA, where I'm normally from. And I just came home, my family, my parents and we just came home from a high school football game. Well, my dad put on HBO, and I saw 4 ropes. Well, I thought it was wrestling with gloves. I didn't know what it was, and I started wondering why they weren't body slamming or drop kicking each other when they were on the ropes. And, my dad explained to me that, my dad, it's boxing, it's different. And then, Mark Breland, he knocked out the guy in the first round. And, I was like, well, how come he's not going to pin him? How come, making that correlation. And ever since then, as they say, the rest is history. I started watching it, and, I boxed as an amateur for a little bit. I boxed in the Army for a little bit. But then once I realized, when I was in my mid-20s, late 20s, which, by the way, in boxing, you're considered getting old. I said, I want to become an official. I want to stay close to the sport and do something in an official capacity. And then I called, at the time, the Missouri State Athletic Commission, because that's where I was stationed. And I said, I want to be a pro referee and a pro judge. Well, how much amateur experience do you have? None. Well, you're not going to be a pro referee then. So, I started off in the amateurs as a judge and as a referee, and you work your way up. It's like I said earlier. These referees that do the Super Bowls and the umpires that do the World Series and hockey referees that do the Stanley Cup Finals, and you dedicate your life to it. You start off in Little League, you work your way up to Pony League, and then high school. In football, you do Pop Warner, you do JV, you do varsity. Maybe some Division II college, then Division I. Then you get the bowl games. Then you go to NFL development camp. Then you're on the big show. So it's not, it's not just someone calling up and I want to be an NFL referee or I want to be an NBA referee. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to pay your dues. You work your way up, in the amateurs, do some gold gloves, do some regionals, do some junior Olympics, and, your reputation, you do good work. You keep safety in mind. You don't do anything unethical or immoral, then, you're going to be good. So to make a long story short, that's how I got started.
Yeah, and there was no cooler guy I thought than Mills Lane was. I don't know who your favorite guy was in the ring, but Mills Lane, man, he was.
Let's get it on.
Yeah, let's get it on in the middle of the ring. And like you was my dad to introduce me to boxing. I actually remember that card. I didn't watch the undercard, but I did watch the main because my dad hated Mike Tyson. Absolutely hated. He was an Ali guy. He was an Ali guy. So he was that was his problem. He didn't like, Tyson and all that. He didn't have respect for Tyson as well.
Mike was.
Go ahead.
Mike, I mean, in the mid '80s, early '90s, man, he was the man. He was dominant, and he was on pace to break Marciano's record until his episode when Douglas put him out. And if you look at the story and read everything that led up to it, and how Mike was partying an hour before the fight with Bobby Brown, I'm not going to say the best man won, but the right man won.
Unpopular with me saying with Mike, I think he was always a touch overrated. As great as he was, it's unpopular to say he clearly wasn't better than Lennox Lewis, in my opinion, and he clearly wasn't better than Evander Holyfield. I don't think there's any universe where people are going to convince me of that. I mean, I think fastest hands I ever saw for heavyweight, though, not even close. I mean,
you never know if Mike and Evander would have fought, when they were supposed to. You never know, because at the time, Holyfield was coming up from light heavyweight to cruiserweight to heavyweight. So, he was just coming up, making his heavyweight debut, where Mike was already, he was a natural heavyweight. And, the results could have been different. I'm not saying they would have been, but they could have been if they would have fought when they were supposed to instead of 5 years later. Same thing with Pacquiao and Mayweather. If they would have fought when they were supposed to, 2010, 2011, I'm not saying the result would have been different, but I'm saying it could have been a much more competitive fight when they were in their primes, like their prime.
I never buy that argument. A lot of people say
you don't think so?
It depends. I don't think, certainly in case of Tyson Lewis, I definitely don't. Lewis is older than Mike.
Yeah.
So I think Mike, regardless of whenever they fought, and I don't really think. I think some people think that when a guy, I don't necessarily buy that. I mean, I think Frazier beat Ali one time, and then they fought again, and I don't think so. I don't necessarily buy the whole when they fought argument if they're in the same era, basically. Like it's true if a guy's much older. Like Holmes fought Tyson, he was 38, and that's a whole different thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and at that time, and he was a name on a resume. Mike Tyson, you're right. He knocked out Larry Holmes, but he didn't beat Larry Holmes. That we know of. He was a name on a resume. And even, to flip it, all these guys that, beat Tyson at the end of it, Danny Williams, Kevin McBride, they didn't beat Mike Tyson. You know what I mean? So, they got him at the tail end, and,
Yeah,
You know,
I
but
think
hey,
that fly. I think that's
and
true in the same. Muhammad Ali getting beat by Larry Holmes. True. That wasn't.
oh yeah, or
That
Trevor
was no
Burbick.
longer. That wasn't no longer. That didn't count.
Yeah,
I'm talking about guys in the same era. If you're 35. No.
yeah,
No, I don't buy it.
yeah.
Nino,
Or Ali,
go ahead. Go ahead. No, go
or
ahead. You
when
talk.
Trevor Burbick beat Ali, he didn't beat Muhammad Ali.
That was even worse. That fight shouldn't even have been sanctioned. Clearly,
No.
Burbick he was nowhere near elite fight. Tell me one more thing. You know, where can the people?
Sure.
I'm not sure you even content anything out there. Tell the people where to find anything that you're doing. You want to promote here, really, at the end.
Well, you know, if anyone wants to reach out to me, my life goal is to not have a Facebook account. You know, you can find me on LinkedIn, and someday I'm going to put on my tombstone, he never had a Facebook account. Kind of like Jesse Ventura. He says he never had a cell phone. I never won a Facebook account. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You know, that's the only social media platform that I'm on. You know, a lot of it's because, I'm an official, I'm a retired Army veteran. I did, 21 years, served some time in Iraq and in Korea. So, a lot of times people try to, throw the political stuff in there or try to bait, so I don't do any of that stuff. So LinkedIn, which is like a corporate Facebook, it's, you could reach out to me on
It's
there.
hard.
Nino
It's hard to
Ovial.
find a job without LinkedIn. They're going to look at that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you almost
exactly.
Like
yeah. So yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm on my backup computer here. I'm on my laptop because if you see behind me, I don't know what's going on. I got the blue screen of death on my computer here. I just had it fixed. So I'm going to have to take a look and see what's going on. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and we'll feel free to chat.
Right.
We'll chop it up and do what we got to do.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. And I want to thank all of you this week for watching the Ravori Sports, our interview this week with our good pal Nino, who agreed to come talk boxing with us. So we appreciate it. Thank you, all of us watching the Ravori Sports podcast. Like and subscribe, especially on the YouTube channel. Absolutely go ahead and do that. You guys have a great rest of your day. Enjoy all the games.
Keep your punches up. Protect yourself at all times.